This next speaker has been on the DefCamp stage many times, and he's delivered every single time. Stefan Tanase, Principal Security Researcher, Application and Threat Intelligence at Ixia, a Keysight business, is here to ask what kind of internet we want our kids to use. Do we want a free one or one in which everything we do and say is monitored? So let's give Stefan a warm welcome back to DefCamp.
Good morning, everyone. So, thank you for being here. This is not going to be a technical presentation, but I think this is a discussion that is really worth having for those of you that care. This is going to be a story about freedom in the digital age. But before we start, I'd like to tell you about George Orwell's 1984, because, you know, as a teenager, reading George Orwell's 1984, I was fascinated and intrigued by this, dystopian world in which everything you would say or do would be monitored by the government. And George Orwell pictured these devices called telescreens, which were essentially fictional devices that were somewhere in between smart TVs and surveillance cameras. And it was mandatory for every citizen to have one of these devices in the room. Now, when I look around ourselves in the world that we live in right now, and I look at all the smart TVs that we buy that have cameras or microphones and other, smart devices, I cannot help but see a very scary resemblance between this dystopian world and the world that we live in nowadays. So, before we start, I'd like to take you a little bit back into the past. And I'd like to ask you to try to imagine a world which has no borders. A world in which human evolution managed to happen because human beings were able to migrate from one place or another. And you probably all know the story of the ancient Silk Road, which was this trading route connecting the East to the West. And essentially, every civilization on the path of this trading route was managed to evolve because they were able to exchange goods and to trade goods. But not only goods, they managed to exchange information, and they managed to exchange ideas, philosophies about things that really matter in life, such as science or religion or anything else. Now, if we fast forward to the present date, actually a little bit in the past, when the internet was created, the same principles stood behind the creation of the internet. The internet was supposed to be this network of academics, right, of researchers in different universities. And the main idea was that they should be able to share information freely and in a timely manner, information about their research, information about the stuff that they were doing. Of course, this was a very small network, so everybody kind of knew each other in like real life. So they didn't think about things such as security or privacy. This is why actually the internet nowadays has so many problems with security, because everything that all the protocols that we're using nowadays were essentially built on top of an already shaky foundation. Now, if you look at what Tim Berners-Lee said, one of the founders of the World Wide Web, one of the creators, he said that he hopes that we will use the net to cross barriers and to connect cultures. And I don't know, maybe you should ask yourself that the world in which we're living nowadays is in accordance to what Tim Berners-Lee said. As far as I read, he's kind of disappointed in the last few years. And he has all the reasons to be disappointed, because we live nowadays in a world in which borders are everywhere. Borders are, let's say, ubiquitous. Every time we travel for vacation or for a business trip, we're used to going through security checks at the airport. We're used to having security guards, checking our passports. We have metal detectors that are checking if we have our keys in our pockets. But the thing that gives me hope is that human beings, they're not okay with any type of border that is imposed on them. Sometimes we like to jump over some walls, and sometimes we even like to take these walls down. And right now, less than 3 decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after that moment put essentially an end to an era of division between the East and the West, what keeps me up at night is that I'm seeing that we're kind of starting to make the same mistakes again, only this time these mistakes are also happening in cyberspace. So what I mean about this, the internet right now is going through a process which is called Balkanization. Now, how many of you are familiar with this word, Balkanization? I see one hand in the back, which is good. This is why I'm here for. Balkanization is a geopolitical term originally, and it's a term that is used to describe the process through which a certain area becomes divided into smaller entities, right? And usually these smaller entities, not only they are not cooperative with each other, but sometimes they can even become hostile to each other. And I think that this is what's happening to the internet, nowadays. And I think that this is, something that we should be thinking about. It all started in, I would say, 1994, actually 1997, when the internet essentially entered China in 1994. And the Communist Party was very quick to realize that this new network has the power and potential to bring like-minded people together. So of course they considered it to be a big threat to their power. So less than 3 years after the internet entered China, in 1997, the first version of the Great Firewall of China became operational. It was up and running, filtering internet traffic and monitoring users' access to the internet. And essentially the free internet in China lasted only for 3 years, between 1994 and 1997. Now the thing is, if you would browse Google images in China during the days in which Google was still operating in China, because at one point they just decided to quit. And by the way, I hear that nowadays they're talking about going back. So I don't know, food for thought. But the idea was that if you would look for pictures of the Tiananmen Square event on the Chinese Google search result page, you would only see pictures of the Tiananmen Square and the clear blue skies and some nice, Eastern architecture. If you do the same search from anywhere else in the world, you would see the famous Tankman picture that became, a worldwide symbol of courage and the worldwide symbol of the revolution. So this is what Balkanization means. And the thing is, this is not a Chinese-only problem. If you look at the world around us, you can see that there's more and more countries which are starting up projects in internet surveillance. And if you look at the evolution of companies, technical companies, many times even security companies, there's a huge, let's say, surge in companies that are in this business of surveilling internet users. You can see that there's a huge increase in the past few years, because guess what? There's a lot of money to be done by selling such technology. At the same time, whenever a government cannot get their hands on information about their citizens that they want, they always have this interesting option, which is to legally compel internet companies, such as Silicon Valley-based companies, to actually hand them over the data that they need, because the government has this power. If you're not willing as a company to hand over this data, then maybe you will not be able to operate in a specific region. So luckily for us, most of these internet companies or companies that are taking care of our internet are actually publishing these results, are publishing data about government requests. And again, you can see there's an interesting increase here going on as well. But at least we have transparency, and at least we know what to expect with our data. Now, maybe the Chinese example is not something that will touch you, because China is far away and we don't really care about what's happening there. But I'd like you to take a moment and travel to a place which is much closer to our home, and that place is Turkey. And I'd like you to tell you a quick story about a Turkish journalist named Barış Pehlivan. Now, Barış was recently released from prison, from jail, where he spent almost 2 years after the government managed to find some, let's say, compromising documents on his PC at work, so on his desktop PC at work. Now, what actually happened there was Barish was not the one to put those documents on that hard drive. What happened there was that the weekend before their office was raided, somebody broke into that office at night, on a Friday night, when there was nobody there. They physically removed the hard drive from the computer, they planted those files there, and then put the hard drive back. So on Monday, when the office was raided, surprise, surprise, Barish's computer had those compromising files on them. Now, how do we know the story? How do we know the fact that Barish was not the one to put those files on his hard drive? Well, there's this forensic investigation report from Arsenal, which is a very interesting and very good team of forensic investigators, IT forensic investigators. And they did this forensic analysis on Barish's hard drive, and they discovered that those files were planted there in between the moment when the computer was turned off and the moment when the computer was turned on. So how can some files appear on a hard drive when the computer is turned off? It's very simple to, prove this if you have the right skill set. They not only covered the fact that these files were planted there, but they uncovered another interesting thing, which was that in the weeks before this late evening or late night visit to his office, Barish's computer was attacked more than a dozen times with a malware, with a Trojan essentially, that we in the security industry, you call it ahtapot. Now, ahtapot means octopus in Turkish. So essentially what I think happened there was they tried to attack his computer remotely, they failed, so they sent an operative team to that office to actually plant those files there. And I wanted to tell you this story because I know all of you are interested in security, all of you are interested in defending, cyber things, cyber information. We all love the word cyber. And I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand that what we do is actually very important. What we do is not just to protect some computers from some malicious actors. What we do can actually have consequences in real life. And in Barish's case, the consequence was his actual freedom, his physical freedom, because he spent almost 2 years in jail. Now, the thing is, if you look at the freedom of press map around the world from Reporters Without Borders, you can see that most of the countries in which the internet is not really free are also the countries in which actual physical freedom is being threatened, and things such as free journalism is something that is very hard to do. The other interesting thing is that most of the companies that are building mass surveillance technologies and spying technologies are usually based in the areas which are more, yellow or orange. Now, why is this important? Like, why do we care about this? The reason why I care about this is that when there's mass surveillance happening and you know that everything that you do or write is being monitored and logged, then you might change your behavior. How many times did you guys, and good ladies of course, think that you should post a status message on Facebook, a new status update, and then gave it a second thought about the fact that, hey, maybe my mother is going to see this picture that I'm uploading, and then you just decided not to upload it. So, of course, you don't need to read an Oxford study to realize that self-censorship is something that appears in an environment in which the internet is surveilled. But there is such an Oxford study, and I recommend you to read it if you have time. Now, our intellect is not the only one that can thrive when freedom is something that is available to you. Another thing that usually goes well with freedom is the economy. There's a McKinsey study that essentially says that 21% of the GDP growth in modern countries, in mature countries, is created by the internet. So having a free and important internet is something that can positively affect our wallets too, not just our intellect. And just how the internet is positively affecting our wallets, the modern Silk Road positively affected Ross Ulbricht because he essentially became very rich by running this website. Now, how many of you have visited Silk Road when it was still online? Have you heard about it at least? Okay, perfect. So, Silk Road was this underground website, underground marketplace, in which essentially anything and everything could be sold. I would call it the Amazon of illegal things. So you could buy drugs, you could buy weapons, you could buy fake IDs, right? So questionable things. Now, Ross Ulbricht, the creator of Silk Road, he described himself as being an extreme libertarian. So he believed that it's up to every person in the world to be able to choose, what substances they use or what guns they're going to buy. This was his attitude about life and about things that really matter. So he set up this website and he kept it running for a few years. Until, of course, it attracted the attention of law enforcement, right? It attracted the attention of the Europol and of the FBI. And what happened there, the website got seized by the authorities. Ross Ulbricht was arrested. That was the moment when we all realized that this guy became very rich by essentially taking a small fee out of every transaction that was happening on Silk Road. And the Silk Road takedown was one of the biggest law enforcement operations that affected the internet in the past years. And this takedown couldn't have happened without international cooperation. I mean, Silk Road couldn't have existed without international cooperation, and then the death of Silk Road couldn't have happened without international cooperation. And cooperation inside the security industry was something that surprised me the most more than 10 years ago when I was a young guy and I joined the security industry. Because I was so amazed at how researchers from different companies or from different parts of the world are cooperating with each other even though they work in competing businesses. So their businesses are competing in selling products on the market, but the researchers and the research teams, they all understand that they are fighting the same battle, they are fighting the same enemy, so they need to cooperate. And actually, this is how we managed to filter through more than 300,000 malicious software samples every day. And this is how we are managing to find the needle in the haystack. This is how we manage to find the interesting APTs or the most sophisticated threats or the new vulnerabilities and the 0 days. It's not about the money that the security companies have. It's not about the bare metal servers. It's not about the machine learning algorithms. It's all about cooperation, and it's all about working together. And this is something that I was so surprised and happy to see happening. Now, let's take a moment and talk about nationalism. Because I think nationalism is something that is kind of affecting the security industry right now. Nationalism is this concept that kind of surfaced around, let's say, 3 centuries ago. And it's essentially a concept in which a country will always prioritize working with itself compared to working with its neighbors. It's a concept that says that, you should do everything by yourself and you know better than the other people on how to approach things. And if you look at what's happening in Europe right now, and maybe not only in Europe, nationalism is definitely on the rise. And I'm trying to look at this trend and trying to see how it's affecting the internet that we use nowadays and how it's affecting the information security industry, which I think is one of the most important industries right now. And what I'm seeing is that there is a real trend of drafting and passing legislation which is meant to protect companies from the countries where they come. So it's like digital protectionism 2.0. And this is the world that we live in right now. And I want you to, take a moment to think about this. Now, if you look at what we're doing on social networks, for example, it's very easy to see that we are living in different bubbles. And I think this is natural, we like to surround ourselves with people that have the same ideas that we have. So of course on social networks, we'll only become friends with people that share the same feelings with us. We're only following pages and websites that are giving us the information that we want to hear. And if you map the connections on a social network, you can easily see how, like for example, this is a picture for the Brexit with the hashtags that were used on the social networks. The blue side is the Brexit side, the red side is the Remain side. And the problem is that these bubbles, they don't communicate with each other. And I think that this is not the purpose for which the internet was created. The internet was created so that we can all communicate with each other. And people naturally, because of differences in language or culture or understanding of the world, they will separate themselves. And then if we, the IT crowd, the IT guys come up and we raise even more borders, I don't know, where can this thing lead to? Now, the reason why I wanted to have this presentation today, and I'd like to thank everyone for being here and paying attention to what I have to say, is that we in the IT world, often, we don't like to think about what we're doing. We are doers. We just want to do. We want to write code. We want to move on to the next iteration. We want to add new features to our products. But I think we need to take a moment and take a step back and try to think about the things that we're doing, because reading a little bit of history or reading a little bit of philosophy can really help. Because the technology that we're building, or the technology that we're working on, which is the internet, it is the greatest thing that ever happened to the world, and it is something that can truly change the world. And I think that we as IT guys, and especially as security people, we have a huge responsibility to the rest of the internet users, and what we are doing can really shape the future of our world. So that's why I think we need to really understand the consequences of the code that we're writing. Now, why I'm saying this is very important is because I like to look at security researchers as being something like the doctors of the internet. So just like, doctors have sworn to protect, for example, in a battle area, to cure a soldier or a civilian, no matter on which side he was fighting or no matter on which side of the border they were. The same thing I saw in all these years with security researchers. They don't care about geography, they don't care about politics, they just care about researching threats, discovering new things, and protecting users' computers. And you can actually see the similarities between the medical world and the IT security world when you look at the terminology that is being used. Terms such as virus, disinfection, epidemic, quarantine. These are all terms coming from the medical world. So this is why I think the security researchers are the doctors of the digital era. And another thing that I want you to think about is the Manhattan Project. Because right now we're celebrating 73 years since the only moment in history in which atomic bombs have been used at Hiroshima and at Nagasaki. And if you look at the Manhattan Project, you'll realize that in order to build these bombs, governments had to put together teams of the best and smartest minds that were available back then, which were nuclear engineers. Being a nuclear engineer is not easy, right? And I think the same place we have right now as security researchers, because in the security world, you can find some of the greatest minds in the IT world. And just like, let's say, Manhattan Project couldn't have been possible if these researchers knew what they are working on, because they were kept in the dark. Each of them was working on his little piece of the puzzle, and somebody up there was connecting all these pieces of the puzzle. So all the information was compartmentalized, and they would approach it as, on a need-to-know basis. You would only know some things if you actually needed to know. And what I'm worrying is that the security industry is doing the same thing. So this is why I'm a big fan of publishing things. This is why I'm a big fan of international cooperation and on, opening up and talking to everybody. And this is why conferences such as DefCamp, where we are right now, are a good thing for us, the community, to meet each other, to have a coffee together, and to talk about the work that we do. Because if these engineers in the Manhattan projects could have shared the information and could have talked to each other, they would very easily understand what kind of project they are working on. So with this in mind, this is going to be the end of the presentation. I just want to share with you one last thought, which is that, I'm looking at the world we live in nowadays, and I'm looking at how governments approach dealing with the internet. By the way, you guys saw that this week we had a piece of news in Romania that certain websites are going to be blocked. There's going to be DNS filtering that is going to be imposed on ISPs to block websites which are sharing pirated content. The same kind of DNS blocking was implemented for the first time in Romania a couple of years ago when we had the new law that was meant to regulate the online gambling area. So any kind of online gambling or online casino that wasn't authorized to operate in Romania had to be blocked on the ISP level. And I think trends such as this ones are very dangerous because maybe you don't care about online casinos because you're not gamblers. Maybe you don't care about websites with pirated content because you all pay for the content that you watch. But this is how it starts. And I want you to, spend some time and think about these things because I do. And I think that every person in the tech world should do the same. And what's worrying me is that looking at governments, I'm seeing that governments already decided what kind of internet they want for themselves, right? They want an internet in which everything that you do is monitored and surveilled and logged somewhere. And I think that right now it's our turn as engineers, as software people, as security people, to kind of answer the same question. What kind of internet do we want our kids to use in the future? Do we want it to be something like George Orwell's 1984, where everything is surveilled and censored? Or do we want an internet in which things such as privacy and security are human rights and is something that everyone deserved? So thank you very much for paying attention.
Thank you for this presentation, Stefan. I think that it gave us a lot of food for thought.
I think we started kind of early because it was at 12:30 in the schedule.
We did start early.
So we have time for lots of questions if there's any questions.
Yay for that. So please put your hands up so we can see them and bring a mic to you. There's one over here.
Just a short question, a little controversy, because you said not everything should be logged, so it shouldn't be monitored, but one thing in the case of the first case you brought up with the computer where the hard drive was removed and then added, the only reason you know that this happened because it was logged when the computer is turned on and off. So if this wouldn't have been logged, you wouldn't know that there was a hack. So I think logging is okay, but you should keep it private. So this is...
Thank you very much. You actually answered your own question. So yeah, of course, logging is okay. Like you cannot do security without logging things. You cannot analyze incidents without looking at those logs. But the question is, who else has access to those logs? How long do we want to keep those logs access? How do we control if the information in those logs is not abused by entities that can, in many places, legally compel companies to share those logs? So exactly, this is maybe one of the biggest challenges that we have in this security world. And thank you for pointing this out, because this is why I'm happy to be here and try to open up this conversation, because like I said, many of the times we as IT people, we just want to do things and we don't really think about the things that we're doing, and the problems that we have to solve are pretty complex. So thank you.
We have a question over there. We have time for a lot of questions.
You mentioned earlier in the talk that those companies that do the surveillance jobs for some governments publish their data. Is there any law which makes it mandatory for them, or they just do it?
I think that they just do it. So there is still hope. I don't think there's a law that's compiling them to publish this data. And by the way, I was not talking about surveillance companies, but I was talking about companies such as Twitter, Facebook, Google. These are companies that are essentially building and hosting the platforms that are most used around the world. And the fact that they are publishing these numbers, these statistics about government requests, like how many, you can actually check on Google's page or on Facebook page and see how many government requests they received from the Romanian government. And the fact that they publish this data is an exercise that they are doing in transparency. Many of the times these requests are supposed to remain secret, so they're not allowed to share the details of what was requested, but they can aggregate the information, and they can, and they are doing this and publishing it so that we can understand what's happening. But if we know where to look for.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go on over to the next one.
Hello. Since the internet no longer appears to be serving its initial purpose, we are all served regionalized content. We are blocked. You know, the Google results you used to get for a search 10 years ago, you no longer get to them, or you get them really hard at the moment. Do you think we need a new internet?
This is a very good question, and I will add one more example, which is, for example, something that every online business is practicing, which is price discrimination based on the geographical area, or even based on the metadata that your browser is sharing. So for example, there's websites in which you go and buy things, and if they see that you have an Internet Explorer 7 running on Windows user agent, you'll get a price. And if they see you run a Mac, you'll get a different price because, hey, you're a rich guy, you managed to afford to buy a Mac. And to answer your question, do we need the new internet? You know, if you read what Tim Berners-Lee is saying in the last 2 years, he's kind of disappointed in the way that the internet turned up so many decades after they created it. And Tim Berners-Lee is becoming a very big fan of having a decentralized internet. So I don't want to say the B word, but I think that this is something that we should think of. You know what the B word is, right?
No, what's the B word?
Blockchain.
You made him say it.
Hey, nice talk. So my question is, what's your biggest fear regarding internet censorship?
So my biggest fear is that I have the feeling right now that we are in some sort of a boiling frog situation. So I'm seeing that internet censorship is becoming more and more common, and is becoming coming more and more closer to where we are right now, located. And I have the feeling like nobody cares about this. And my biggest fear is that nothing will change. So I hope that answers your question.
Let's take one from the other side as well, and then we'll get to you as well.
Hello. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on net neutrality. Do you think we're fighting a losing battle, or do you see all of these measures being taken for censorship, I mean, as part of that big picture and as part of that losing battle?
So I tried not to be a pessimist. I usually like to see myself as being a realist. So I wouldn't want to say if it's a losing battle, even though sometimes I have these exact feelings. And actually, net neutrality is a very interesting topic, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because in Romania, for example, we have absolutely no debate about things such as no net neutrality, no public debates, even though the mobile ISPs have already started taking steps in that direction. And the way they're approaching is a little bit different and reversed from what's happening in the United States. They're not saying that, hey, some websites are going to be slowed down and others are going to work much better because they pay us money. But what they do instead is they will give you Facebook for free, or they will give you YouTube for free. So you don't pay for the YouTube traffic, you don't pay for the Facebook traffic. And that's not called being neutral, because on your personal website, if I want to visit it from my phone, I will have to pay for that traffic. And the general public doesn't think about things like this. They see this offer, Facebook and Twitter traffic are free, sounds good, where do I sign up? So thanks for bringing it up. It's actually a good thing we started earlier, because I see there's a lot of questions.
You mentioned more and more governments blocking certain sites and so on. Do you think that there should be some kind of limitation to what we can access in the internet? And if not, who decides what should be blocked and what not?
Very good question. I actually forgot to reach this point, even though I had it in my bullet point list of things that I want to reach at the end. The thing is, I'm not here to decide what's good and what's bad. Like, this is why I wanted to show you the Silk Road example. Like, things such as extreme libertarianism sound good, but they can also, it's like a double-edged sword, you know, having a website in which anyone can order a gun and a fake ID or dangerous drugs is something that can also cause bad things. So I don't want to sit on this stage and decide what's good and what's bad and what we should do about it. I just want to give you, everyone, food for thought, so that we can collectively decide what kind of future do we want. I hope it answers your question.
Okay, on to the next one. We have time for 2 more.
So, Apple as a company is really well known for refusing to give the government access to their users, their customers' data on their phones. And there was a really popular example a few years back when the government asked Apple to give them access to a terrorist's data, his messages, his personal data, so they could prevent other attempts at people's lives. And Apple refused. Do you believe that's a good thing, a bad thing? They should be more open-minded?
I wouldn't say that things with Apple are so black or white. I think they are a little bit gray. Tim Cook recently had a very nice speech at the European Union event where he really praised privacy and security. And looking at Apple as a hardware company, they make money out of selling hardware, not software. I can understand the incentives that they have to keep that data private, because selling data is not in their business model, and they make a lot of money by just selling the hardware. So this is why they have everything they need in order to create more private and more secure devices. And by the way, I'm a big fan of the iPhone. I think it's the most secure, commercially available phone that everyone can buy off the shelf. But I don't want you to get tricked by these things, because at the same time when Tim Cook comes to Europe and praises security and privacy, at the same time Apple in China has a data center in which they only store the Chinese users' data. So this was a mandatory requirement for the Chinese government for Apple to be able to operate in China. At the same time, I've never traveled to China, but I have friends who have recently been there. So, you know, in order to bypass the internet surveillance, the Great Firewall of China, you need to install a VPN application. Now, if you have an iPhone, you're essentially locked in their marketplace, and you can only install applications that they give you, that they allow you to install. And guess what? If you're a Chinese user, you cannot find any VPN application in the Apple Store, because again, this is a requirement from the Chinese government. So I'm totally an Apple fan, boy, maybe, or just a fan. But I also want you to understand what's happening in the other side of the world, because news coming from there doesn't really reach us, or we don't really care about that. And while Apple is definitely doing everything they can to offer us very secure devices and to try to protect our data, this is not happening in every country. The Chinese government will always have leverage on Apple as long as Apple will want to do business in China. And I hear it's a quite lucrative market for them there. So thanks for the question.
Okay, time for the last one.
Hi. There were some very apocalyptic scenarios that you presented and examples, of course, with Google giving you different search results and marketing, targeting marketing. So don't you think it's a little too late now, because all these are already happening, and I don't know if there is a real solution that can impact high-level decision makers about this stuff?
Short answer is I never think it's too late about anything. So it's not too late. It's up to us. It's our internet. It's our technologies. We work in these companies that are developing these technologies. We just need to have access to information in order to have real choice. And you know, in order to evolve, we need to have real choice. And the only way to have real choice is to have access to real information. So this is why I'm worried right now, and this is why I'm having this conversation with you. But I'm not trying to be a pessimistic, and I'm not trying to be a party pooper, you know. We need to go on, life goes on, but we need to think more about these things. And by the way, you mentioned targeted marketing and targeted advertising. I think that this drive that marketing people have to better target ads and to better, you know, make conversions and better click-through rates, I think this is probably one of the worst things that happens with the internet, because the amount of data that companies collect in order to better target those ads is something that is scary if you're actually in the back end and you see those databases. And honestly, I don't really want targeted ads. Like, I'm okay with basic targeting.
Okay, it seems like Lucian has a question that cannot wait.
Hi. I have a question in terms of solution. Do you see technology as a solution to this problem, or do you see the solution as being political? And if it's technology, do you think that we might go back to a time when the internet was growing just in the beginning and it wasn't as widespread and people didn't have wide access to it, and it was just some knowledgeable and hobbyists who are doing this? You think we might have like a splinter internet under the current internet using technologies such as the Tor network or some other equivalent technology where that will be the free internet and what we now see as the internet being very politicized and borders and all that and controlled by governments? Do you see because I don't see from a political point of view any chance of return? I'm more pessimistic than you, I guess.
So yeah, the solution should be both technical and political. You cannot just have one without the other. And yes, having decentralized technologies such as the Tor network is a very good thing for the internet. And by the way, I'm a very big fan of the relationship that I start to see becoming built between the Mozilla Foundation and the Tor network. I don't know if you guys know, but right now if you donate to the Tor network, to the Tor project, then Mozilla Foundation is going to double that donation. And they started implementing lots of privacy features that were first implemented in the Tor browser. Right now they're evolving and implementing them in Firefox. Of course, they're doing this because they're losing market share to Google Chrome, but the trend is good, and I think that what they're doing is very good. But I don't see like only having a different internet like the underground internet as being a solution, because the people that are going to browse that internet are just going to be a very small fraction of the world, as long as these technologies are not easily adoptable by the mass market. So it will be like the digital dissidents that are browsing the free internet, and then 95% of the internet users are going to be stuck with service providers that are doing what they're doing. Let's make it usable. Yeah. We're very smart points here, so yeah. I think that what's happening is, I mean, Tor is becoming more mainstream and decentralized internet solutions are becoming more popular. So I think that it's definitely a good trend. I'm not sure if I'm happy with the velocity, but the direction is definitely a good one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stefan, for answering all these questions and for giving us so much to think about. Let's have a round of applause.